Laudetur Jesus Christus, praise be Jesus Christ. This is Matt Gaspers, managing editor of Catholic Family News, and I'm joined as always by my friend and colleague, Dr. Brian McCall, who is the editor-in-chief of CFN. Hello, Brian. I hope you're doing well this first week of May, and welcome to all of our viewers who are joining us live and all those who will watch this video later on. We thank you for joining us today. Hope you're doing well, Brian.
Yes, happy feast of St. Pius V.
Yes, indeed. And we have a great lineup of stories for you today. The first of which, many of you have probably heard, this leaked draft opinion of the United States Supreme Court, specifically Justice Samuel Alito, concerning the fate of Roe v. Wade. So we'll provide the background information, how this story has developed throughout the week, and then Brian will provide some legal analysis from his expertise as a lawyer and a professor of law. We're also going to look at a recent interview, an interview published earlier this week with Pope Francis, to an interview that he gave to an Italian outlet. And he reiterates basically his desire to meet with President Vladimir Putin of Russia, even says he's open and ready to go to Moscow, which would certainly be historic if that actually happens. I don't think it will, but we'll see. And he also has some interesting things to say, some speculation regarding the causes of the Ukraine conflict. So we'll take a look at that. Our third story today involves this recently unveiled so-called Disinformation Governance Board. That was actually, the story about this broke around the same time our broadcast last week. We just didn't have time to include it, and we had lots of other material to discuss. So we're going to break down the details of that story today, which many people are calling this online, as you've probably seen, Biden's so-called Ministry of Truth, hearkening back to the George Orwell novel 1984, and it certainly has some applicable parallels, as we'll see. We also are going to discuss a new report from the Lepanto Institute, Michael Hitchborn, our friend and colleague, and he's exposed yet again that the USCCB is funding a pro-abortion group, despite obvious conflict there with church teaching and faith and morals. And then finally, we have a positive story to end with today. It's really about a pilgrimage of tradition. It's about a group of mothers of traditional Catholic priests who walked to Rome in order to beseech Pope Francis to lift the restrictions on the traditional Mass and sacraments. So a heroic act on their part. Before we get into all the news today, as always, we will spend a few moments looking at the liturgical calendar and pondering the things that are above, as St. Paul says. So as Brian mentioned a few moments ago, it is the traditional feast day of Pope St. Pius V. We're coming to you live on Thursday, May 5th, 2022. And I just wanted to read the collect for today's Mass in the traditional Roman Rite. It's very beautiful, and it kind of highlights how Pope St. Pius V was a crucial pontiff both in the civil sphere as well as in the ecclesiastical sphere. He did a lot of work in both of those spheres. And he's certainly a pope, if God would raise up for us in our day a pope similar to St. Pius V, that would be a wonderful blessing for the church. So here's today's collect from Mass. It says, O God, who for the overthrow of the enemies of thy church and for the restoration of divine worship didst vouchsafe to choose blessed Pius as supreme pontiff, grant that we may be defended by his patronage and so cleave to thy service, that overcoming all the wiles of our enemies, we may rejoice in perpetual peace. It's a wonderful prayer. Last year, as I think Brian will recall, Sophia Institute Press published a biography about St. Pius V, written by Professor Roberto de Mattei, and it is titled St. Pius V. The subtitle is The Legendary Pope Who Excommunicated Queen Elizabeth I, standardized the Mass, and defeated the Ottoman Empire. I haven't actually had a chance to read the book in full. I think I've read a little bit of it, and it was very good what I was able to read. I don't know if Brian's had a chance to review that book, but I'm sure there's lots of excellent literature on Pope St. Pius
Yep.
V, one of the church's greatest popes.
Yes, it was. I did read it. It is a very good book, and really is an all-around pope. I mean, he did so much for the church and the world. Defended really is without him, the Holy League would not have formed to hold the monks of Lepanto. And he reformed the city of Rome. It had become very corrupt. He cleaned it up. So really, a model pope.
Yes, definitely. And looking ahead on the liturgical calendar, we have some other good saints and feasts coming up. So we have this coming Saturday, a Polish saint, Saint Stanislaus, a bishop and martyr, patron of Poland, reproached by King Boleslas the Cruel for his dissolute life. He reproached the king, rather, I'm sorry, and while saying Mass was put to death by him in 1079. So, bishop and martyr. And then next week, we have a great father and doctor of the church, St. Gregory Nazianzen, who was educated at Athens in all the sciences with St. Basil the Great and became Bishop of Nazianzen. And his profound knowledge earned for him the title of doctor and theologian. He's also known as Gregory the Theologian. And then also later this coming, or next week, I should say, is May 11th is the feast of Saints Philip and James, both apostles. So some good feasts, good saints coming up on the calendar. I don't know if Brian had anything else he wanted to add for our liturgical segment.
No, just a reminder, tomorrow's First Friday and then First Saturday. And
oh, yes,
very good particularly reminder. Can make the communion of reparation on the first Saturday as Our Lady requested. That's something we can completely do. We don't need a pope or bishop for that. We can do that on our own.
Yes, definitely. That would be the best Mother's Day present that we could give to Our Lady.
Yes.
I should mention this coming Sunday is Mother's Day, so we wish all of the mothers who watch our program a happy Mother's Day in advance, and we hope you have a wonderful day with your families.
Yes. So turning to our first story then of the week, this is the big news, a major leak out of the U.S. Supreme Court. And before diving into the story, I do want to impress upon everyone how significant this is. There has never been anything like this in the history. I've been trying to find, nothing certainly in my lifetime, but I tried to do some research. Nothing like this has ever happened with the Supreme Court before, with a draft opinion. Interestingly, the closest that we've ever come to this was a few hours before Roe v. Wade, the horrendous decision that created abortion, was released. It was leaked to the public. Just again, but that was already decided. It was done. It just was put out a few hours early. Nothing like this, but this is absolutely extraordinary. And really, I hope that the U.S. Marshals, that Congress, someone does something about this, the person that has done this, because it really is extraordinary. So what are we talking about? Well, this week, Politico published what purported to be a draft opinion dated in February for the Dobbs case. Now, that is the case we've reported on before, where the U.S. Supreme Court is considering a Mississippi ban on abortion at 15 weeks. And this is together with appendices, about a 98-page draft opinion, which, if nothing has changed or does change, would overrule Roe versus Wade. Now,
and that law was passed, I think, in 2018, and it's been challenged in court, so it hasn't been able to be enacted, right? But it has passed the Mississippi legislature and was signed into law.
It was enacted. It hasn't been able to be enforced because,
Enforced,
yes,
that's right.
it's been enjoined by lower federal courts. So right now, the decision the Supreme Court was reviewing is a lower court struck it as unconstitutional. So before we get into it, maybe let's just explain a little bit how the Supreme Court works. So the 9 justices hear oral argument. That happened in December. And then usually within a very short period, within a week, often, depending, unless there's some intervening event, they meet in what's called conference, and they each cast straw poll votes.
Mhm.
Which way would they decide the case? Then whichever decision has a majority of justices, the most senior justice in that group assigns one of them to begin drafting an opinion. What would be the opinion of the court? And the
Mhm.
opinion is very important. The result obviously is important, but beyond Mississippi, the opinion, the writing will be important because it will explain the scope of the decision. And does it apply nationwide? What does it mean? So it is very significant. Then what happens for several months, usually a draft is written, it's circulated among the justices. Those in the majority can give opinions or mark it up with comments or things they'd like some wording changed. But justices can then also move around a bit. Some of them might concur in the result, but write their own separate opinion. Others might write a dissent. Now, the only opinion that matters is the opinion of the majority of the court. The others are just for precatory, persuasive reasons to just state what they want to say differently. So, what we know from the Politico leaked opinion is this opinion is being written by Justice Samuel Alito, who has been on the court for quite some time. You can see him. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. The bottom row.
Yeah.
Yeah, the far you can. Okay, that is Samuel Alito. He wrote this draft opinion and circulated it, and the Supreme Court, in a very, again, extraordinary circumstance, Justice John Roberts, in a public statement, confirmed the authenticity of this draft, that it was a draft, and then understandably confirmed that this is not a final decision of the court. It will not be until officially published. But he did confirm that this is a leaked document. So we have highest confirmation that it is real. Now, again, until they make their final vote and sign and issue the opinion, which would likely be under normal circumstances late June, this has no force of law. This is only a draft. It's like you don't get a grade on your draft paper that you maybe submit. But it is very difficult to discern how this might affect it, whether they would more quickly issue the opinion because this is out, or whether it will maybe be delayed as a result. I don't know that answer. But that's really the background overview of what's happened. Now, again, with the caveat, this may not be the opinion of the court. Um, what does it say? Well, as I said, most importantly, it holds that Roe v. Wade, 1973, was wrongly decided, is not a proper interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution does not include a right to kill your child in your womb, and therefore is overruled, meaning it no longer has the force of law. This is a rare thing that the Supreme Court can do and has done. Again, rare because generally when they make a decision, they think, well, for the sake of people relying on it and consistency, we should stick with it, even if it's not perfect. When they choose to overrule it, it's because time has shown it was such a horrifically wrongly decided opinion that the costs of changing course are outweighed by the harm the opinions caused. So it is really very significant. The most significantly known Supreme Court overruling was Brown versus Board of Education, which overruled Plessy versus Ferguson, case which was discussed a lot at the oral argument, which said that separate was equal, that you could treat people on the basis of race differently, and that's
Mhm.
not unequal. That was overruled and as an impossible legal standard. And really, there have been some other overrulings, but that is probably the most popularly known instance.
And an important point I wanted to mention in the introduction to Justice Alito's draft opinion, both the petitioners, meaning those in favor of Mississippi's Gestational Age Act, and the respondents, those against the Mississippi law, have said that a review of Roe as well as Casey in 1992 decision is necessary in order to render a decision at the current time. As Justice Alito mentions at the end of his introduction, he says that the respondents, quote, tell us that no half measures are available. We must either reaffirm or overrule Roe and Casey. So this draft opinion is not the result of what, people on the left are claiming judicial activism or anything like that. It's simply responding to a specific request from all parties concerned. Everyone recognizes that Roe and Casey have to be reviewed and either upheld or overturned. Those are the only two options.
Right, and again, he makes a very strong. Again, there's a lot of appendices because he has a lot of detailed information, but the main text of the opinion is over 60 pages. And what he basically argues this is first, it declared something in the Constitution which appears nowhere there. It was just basically invented out of thin air, and it created a legal standard that has shown itself to be unworkable. Again, and that had no basis in law. Justice Blackmun, who wrote Roe v. Wade, which, by the way, to remind us that things aren't over till they're over, Roe v. Wade at the first conference, the judges voted to deny the case and to allow the Texas law against criminalization of abortion to stand, that they said there was no right to abortion. Then there were a lot of political pressure put on the justices. Some of them were threatened with some blackmail, and then they switched their votes and revoted and then voted in favor of allowing abortion. So it's interesting that there were some shenanigans going on back then. But in any event, he says it's unworkable standard. What Roe says is there are sort of three trimesters of pregnancy, and then there's this thing called viability that they can't really define, and that you're allowed to restrict abortion after viability, not completely ban it, but have some regulation, some restriction, but nothing before. It was completely unworkable, and that's why the decision in Planned Parenthood v. Casey came up in 1992, in which, again, the court made a bad situation worse. They realized, they said viability was unworkable. You couldn't, it was no real standard. And they admitted that there are legitimate regulations that the state can make. So they came up with an even more unworkable standard called no undue burden, that you cannot put a, quote, undue burden on abortion. Well, what does that mean?
Which is very subjective, yes.
Yes. And it was a very muddled decision. There was actually no majority. There were several concurring opinions. There was a plurality opinion, but no majority of the justices agreed with anything. Several of them, including Thomas, said he would overrule it. But Alito going through this shows how there's no basis in law, Anglo-American history, the Constitution. There's no fundamental right to abortion ever been recognized. He goes through all the laws of every state that regulated or outright banned abortion.
Very, very thorough.
Very thorough. He goes through the legislative history of Mississippi when they adopted this law. And this is important because although he doesn't rule, which gives a possibility, Chris Ferrara suggested in his book, Liberty, the God That Failed, that the Supreme Court could say you can't have abortion at all. It denies life from a child without due process of law, which is actually named in the Constitution. The government cannot take away your life without due process. Well, there's no due process. You don't have a court hearing the abortion. So a court could do that. They obviously in this draft don't do that. But what he does say is it's perfectly reasonable for Mississippi to conclude, based on scientific and other evidence that he relays, that this is a human being and human life, and that they have an interest in protecting, the state has an interest in protecting this unborn life. And therefore, it's perfectly rational to have rules about religion, which is normally how state laws are evaluated. If the state law has a rational basis, then it has to be respected by the Constitution. And he says overwhelmingly. But interesting in making that argument, the fact that he went to the trouble to show all that evidence why this is a human life really shows he certainly believes that and is on a moral framework very clearly in the right. But he then, again, goes on to discredit all of the attempts of the Supreme Court to prop up their fiat decision in Roe v. Wade. And then he goes through, again, this issue. The court doesn't lightly change and overrule opinions, but he says this basically after over 40 years, the decision didn't end anything. It made it worse. He sort of examines that, there were different, and one can have legitimate debates about what laws we should have about abortion. You can agree it's wrong, just like many things, but say, well, what's the best law to stop it, right? And there's differences, nuances. Texas has one approach, et cetera. And that was happening in states. And he says, rather than actually ending this issue for America, it made it even more divisive, more political, and has, ceaselessly never ended. We keep getting cases, he says, at the Supreme Court year after year after year of states trying to do things, being struck down. And this is a never-ending cycle. We need to end this once and for all and let each state determine the criminal and other laws of their state with respect to this issue.
Here's a direct quote in that regard regarding how bad Roe is and the problems it's caused. Alito writes in his draft opinion, quote, Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak, and the decision has had damaging consequences. And far from bringing about a national settlement of the abortion issue, Roe and Casey have inflamed debate and deepened division. Very well said.
Yes, I mean, if this became the opinion of the court, I think there's not much more we could have hoped for. It is not piecemeal. It's not allow Mississippi, but let's see, it is across the board. Every state that has adopted a restriction, a so-called latent triggering, because a lot of them have, if the Supreme Court does this, here's the law, would immediately go into effect. And, it would be phenomenal. But the question is, why was this leaked? Clearly, they're desperate. The radical Marxists saw that they had a solid majority. They must have worked them over, tried to get them to change their votes. Again, why was it leaked now? Why in May? This has been around since February. They must have realized time was running out and they are not getting their way. So this was a way to try to put public pressure on the judges. Just today, I learned the private home addresses of the 5 justices who we believe have been leaked and made public so that people can show up at their homes. And you may recall there have been several federal judges who have had very strange demises in the past year or two, including the first judge in the Ghislaine Maxwell case, who was assassinated at her front door. In any event, this was leaked for a reason, and I do not doubt that there will be intense threats, pressure brought on one of these, because they may only need one. It appears it's not clear what John Roberts is doing, as if he's in the dissent or if he would allow the Mississippi law but not overrule. But if they could get to, I think Alito and Thomas, in my opinion, they're not going to get to, no matter. They've threatened and beaten up poor Justice Clarence Thomas by attacking his wife so much that there's not much more they could do to the man. Right. But Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett in particular, I think they have been targeting and trying to get to maybe weaken or change their position. We just don't know. I think there's
presumably Justice Gorsuch would be in favor of this.
From his prior writing and I think he is solidly with Alito and the Thomas. Again, I don't think that Barrett and Kavanaugh are in favor of abortion, but they might be the most open to a halfway house. Okay, we'll allow the Mississippi, but say some abortion laws are okay or some abortions okay. They are the most, and mostly because of the most recently put on the court. They haven't had time as a justice to speak about it. We don't know. But I think the liberals are probably threatening and targeting them the most to at least moderate their position from their perspective and come up with some compromise that doesn't go full bore.
So assume, hypothetically, if this does end up being the opinion of the court and it goes into effect, what will this decision do, practically speaking? I know you mentioned that certain laws will go into effect. Essentially, it's returning the decision back to the state legislatures. Is that correct?
Yes. The decision how to deal with abortion would go back to the way it was before 1973 in our whole history. And prior to really 1960, every state outlawed abortion, criminalized, again, in different ways. There's different, you criminalize the doctor, the people, but all of the laws that are there would go into force. There are several which are already under injunction, like this law, that haven't made it to the Supreme Court yet, that would also be able to go into effect fairly quickly. And then any other states that have good legislators would be able to enact new laws to
So
do
I think
this.
it's important for us to remember, as members of the pro-life community, the pro-life movement, that there's definitely still work to be done even after this happens. This isn't
Oh,
the
yes,
end. This is the
yes.
beginning of getting of putting an end to abortion. It's not the end of
So
the road.
who you elect as governor and your state legislature this year is very important. Also, the Marxists and the Democratic Party have announced, Schumer announced just today, I think, that he is going to try to get a law passed through Congress repealing state laws and making abortion, codifying essentially the holding of Roe v. Wade, that abortion's a federal right. Now, there's questions whether that'll be constitutional, but they're planning to do it. So if they retain the presidency to sign a law and get a majority in the Senate and House that could pass this, that they will do that. So the midterm elections are critical, that they
Yes.
don't preempt like they did with the court through state, through either state or through the Congress. And this is alluded to a little bit. So we have the reaction of the second Catholic sick president in history, Joe Biden, who was asked about this leaked opinion. Why don't we take a look at that
Yes.
bumbling response now?
What was the second one? You want, look,
The second one was on abortion.
as I said when when this hit, as I was getting on the plane to go down to Alabama, this is about a lot more than abortion. I hadn't read the whole opinion at that time. But this reminds me of the debate with Robert Bork. Bork believed the only reason you had any inherent rights was because the government gave them to you. If you go back and look at the opening comments of Bork Biden, when I was questioning him as chairman, I said, I believe I have the rights that I have, not because the government gave to me, which you believe, but because I'm just a child of God, I exist. I delegated.
Now, if you could
by
pause it
joining
there for
this
just a second.
union here.
Yes.
So just consider for a moment the astounding hypocrisy in that statement.
Yes.
So he's pontificating about, saying that God and not government is the source of our rights, which is a true statement, but simultaneously he's denying the God-given right to life of unborn children.
Yes.
Just unbelievable.
Well,
And
first of
maybe
all, he's
Brian, go
he's
ahead.
mischaracterizing Justice Bork, who
Right.
may
Maybe you could explain who that is and that discussion he's referring to.
So Robert Bork was nominated to the Supreme Court, and Joe Biden was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee when he was nominated. And Bork was basically run out of town and not put on the Supreme Court. He was a brilliant judge. And in fact, totally mischaracterizing his position there. He was a deep natural law scholar who, unlike Biden, did not say we don't. He said the actual opposite of what Biden's trying to say.
Right.
He certainly believed that we had rights through natural law and God, not from the government. But he said the Constitution doesn't just, we can't just make up rights that aren't in the Constitution, that are not natural rights, and just make them up, which is what abortion was. There's no natural right to kill. It was a, quote, right, a civil right made up by the court out of thin air. And he said it's not in the Constitution. So Biden was critical in running Bork out of town and getting him not appointed to the Supreme Court. And again, after he could figure out what the question was, he couldn't even remember.
Right.
But what he's getting to here, and he elaborates a little bit more if we have time to look at it, he's right that this is about more than abortion. As important as this is, there are many, quote, rights that this court, following on Roe v. Wade, because all of these issues are connected and preceding it, made up. Now he's going to scare people, particularly Protestants, about what's coming next. So let's look at where he talks about that.
Delegate some obligation, some rights I have to the governments for social good. So the idea that somehow there is an inherent right, that there is no right of privacy, that there is no right. And remember the debate you don't remember, but we had a debate about
neither do you, I think.
Griswold versus Connecticut. There'd been a law saying a married couple could not purchase birth control in the privacy of their own bedroom and use it. Well, that got struck down. Griswold was thought to be a bad decision by Bork, and my guess is the guy's on the Supreme Court now. What happens if you have a state changes the law saying that children who are LGBTQ can't be in classrooms with other children? Is that
So yeah, he's trying to rally the troops, scare everyone, but
Right.
scare even those who are pro-life, but who are not really pro-life because they support artificial contraception.
Right.
They might come and take your contraceptives away from you.
But
I've
even
noticed that from
here,
the
I mean, in
yeah.
light, if he actually did read Justice Alito's draft opinion, he would know that he's being dishonest here as well, because
Yes.
Alito says explicitly, quote, "And to ensure that our decision is not misunderstood or mischaracterized, we emphasize that our decision concerns the constitutional right to abortion and no other right. Nothing in this opinion should be understood to cast doubt or precedents that do not concern abortion." Although, end quote, although I do agree with Brian that these issues are obviously interrelated, because they're all having to do with procreation and education of children and
Yes.
marriage and all of that. So
Yes. So they are going to go full force with this into the elections and try to get elected on scare tactics to get people to overturn this result. But again, I think we really need to intensify our prayers. This
yes,
would be a great blessing on our country and something that would, I think, have great consequences for our country. That our God would, I'm sure, reward us to end this, at least not completely, because I'm sure New York, California, Massachusetts are going to have the abortion mills pumping it out, as radically as they can after this. But at least in parts of our country, stand up for truth and would end this. So we need to pray that the shenanigans of leaking this in an attempt to scuttle it are not successful.
right. So a final note before we move on to our next story. There's also some information being spread online, which seems to be credible, like advertisements on TikTok and such. Someone sent me an email about this, or an article rather, that the pro-abortion lobby is gearing up, apparently specifically going to target Catholic churches this coming Sunday, Mother's Day, encouraging people to go to Catholic churches to disrupt Mass, and basically to shout their slogans or whatever it is they do. This is something from CatholicVote.org. The article says abortion activists to storm Catholic churches during Mass on Mother's Day. A radical abortion group calling itself Ruth Sent Us, and they're on Twitter at Ruth Sent Us, announced this week that it is mobilizing activists to enter Catholic churches during Mass this coming Sunday in response to reports that the Supreme Court is set to overturn Roe v. Wade. And as Taylor Marshall mentioned in his podcast today, it's interesting that they're going to target Catholic churches, because the devil knows who his real enemy is. It's not the
Yes.
Protestant
Yes.
churches that caved on this
Yes.
decades ago. It is the one true bride of Christ.
Yes.
So be on the lookout for any strange characters you may see this Sunday, and plan
Yes.
accordingly. All right. So our next story is an interview that Pope Francis granted to an Italian daily newspaper called Corriere della Sera, and the English translation comes to us courtesy of Inside the Vatican magazine. And so the interviewer, Lucio Fontana, basically provides it. It's not an actual transcript of the interview. It's more like a summary of what was discussed. So here's what he explained. They cover several different topics. The two that we're going to focus on are the Pope's reiterated desire to meet with Putin, as well as his speculation regarding the causes of the conflict in Ukraine. So what did he say here? So this is the interviewer's summary. The Holy Father recalls his many attempts at stopping the conflict and reiterates his willingness to travel to Moscow. And it does provide direct quotes from Pope Francis throughout this article. So Pope Francis said, quote, "The first day of war, I called the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, on the phone. But I didn't call Putin. I had had a chance to speak with him in December for my birthday, but this time, no, I didn't try to contact him. It was meant to be a clear gesture for the whole world to see, and for that reason I paid a visit to the Russian ambassador. I asked for explanations and told him, in the name of God, stop this war." Later on, Francis continues, about 20 days into the war, I asked Cardinal Parolin, who is the Secretary of State for the Vatican, to convey my message to Putin that I was ready to travel to Moscow. For sure, I was waiting for some kind of opening gesture from the Kremlin leader. We received no answer whatsoever, but we keep pressing them on this issue. Francis continues, I fear, however, that Putin cannot or does not want to agree to our meeting at the moment. Well, it's kind of a no-brainer, I think. So Pope Francis goes on, this is the interviewer rather, providing a summary. Pope Bergoglio's main concern is that Putin won't stop anytime soon. He tries to consider the roots of his behavior, the reasons that are pushing Putin to engage in such a brutal conflict. Maybe it was, quote, NATO barking at Russia's gate, those are Francis's words, that compelled Putin to unleash the invasion of Ukraine. Quote, I have no way of telling whether his rage has been provoked, Bergoglio wonders, but I suspect, this is Francis talking, it was maybe facilitated by the West's attitude. So that's kind of an interesting development. Pope Francis saying that this could be, the war is obviously not Ukraine's fault in the sense that Vladimir Putin is responsible for his decisions. He chose to do his quote unquote special military operation. But Francis here is clearly at least open to the idea that provocation from the West, not just from Ukraine, but from the entire Western world, could have precipitated this conflict. I don't think he's said that in previous statements or interviews, not that I've seen. So going on, the interviewer explains, those who care for peace are now grappling with the thorny question of weapon deliveries from Western countries to the Ukrainian resistance. The Holy Father, a divisive argument for many, an argument that is likely to split asunder the world of Catholics and pacifists. The Holy Father has his doubts on the matter. His doctrine has always rejected the arms race and strongly condemned any escalation in the production of weapons, which might end up being used sooner or later on the battlefield. Here's another quote from Francis. I can't answer that question. I live too far away. I don't know if it is the right thing to supply the Ukrainian fighters. What seems indisputable is that in that country, both sides are trying out new weapons, meaning the Ukrainians as well as the Russians. The Russians have just found out that tanks are useless and they might be developing new weapons. Wars are fought for this reason too, to test your arsenals. This is what happened in the Spanish Civil War before the Second World War. Then he gives a couple of historical examples involving our conflicts in, what does he say here? In Yemen, a couple of years ago, a ship docked in Genoa. It was loaded with weapons to be transferred to a cargo heading to Yemen. It goes on saying, or this is the interviewer again, Pope Bergoglio's thoughts throughout our conversation always seem to turn back to what is right. He has been repeatedly asking for a symbolic, for a symbolic visit to Ukraine, but his answer has always been uncompromising. Quote, I am not ready to travel to Kiev, not yet. I have sent my envoy, Cardinal Michael Cherny, head of the Dicastery for the Promotion of Integral Human Development, and Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, the Pope's almoner. The latter, Francis says, has just visited Kiev for the 4th time, but I feel that I shouldn't go there, not yet. First, I must go to Moscow. So the other statement that kind of definitely caught the attention of the Russian Orthodox Church, Francis said during the interview that Putin cannot, Kirill, Patriarch Kirill, cannot or should not lower himself to become Putin's altar boy, I think is the term that he used. So the Russian Orthodox Patriarchate, specifically the Department for External Church Relations, responded by saying, quote, it is regrettable that a month and a half after the conversation with Patriarch Kirill, Pope Francis chose the wrong tone to convey the content of this conversation. So during the interview, they Pope Francis commented on his virtual meeting with Patriarch Kirill and Metropolitan Hilarion, who's the head of the Department for External Church Relations, the Russian Orthodox Church. This was held back in mid-March. I think it was March 16th. And after listening to Kirill explain all of his rationale for supporting Putin's decision, Francis basically said, "I don't understand your reasoning, and this is not acceptable, et cetera, et cetera." So the Russian Orthodox Church has now said regarding this comment about Kirill not stooping to be Putin's altar boy, such utterances can hardly further constructive dialogue between the Roman Catholic and Russian Orthodox churches, which is so necessary at the current time. And then it gives its account of what was supposedly actually said during the mid-March conversation. So that's pretty much most of the interview there. Francis also talked about the kind of this controversy that erupted over the Stations of the Cross that we cover, in Rome for Holy Week on Good Friday. We covered that a couple of weeks ago, where you had the Ukrainian woman and the Russian woman, and kind of politicizing the way of the cross, basically. And then
essentially this is selective ecumenism. So basically, we want to tiptoe around everybody else, but if I don't like you, then I'm going to just insult you.
Right.
Insult the Patriarch of Moscow, not because he denies the truth of the Catholic faith, not calling him back to the truth, but just with a personal ad hominem kind of attack. It just shows how low he has brought the great office of the papacy. It's really, as was seen in the Demos memo we covered a while ago, and certainly in the Vatican, there's not even any respect among politicians for Pope Francis. He's just enmeshed himself in the nitty gritty of this sort of international disputes, rather than taking the position of popes to stand on principle, to stand aloof from these petty things, and to be a source of unity. He's just being a source of disunity.
Right. So one closing note I noticed interesting at the end of this summary of the interview, the interviewer says, "The Holy Father's last thought is reserved to the late Cardinal Carlo Martini," which is the famous anti or pre-Bergoglio Pope. He was in charge of the infamous St. Gallen Mafia, basically. So the interviewer says the last thought was reserved to Martini, in particular to what Francis considers to be the, quote, perfect article that Martini wrote on terrorism and war after 9/11. "It is so relevant," Pope Francis says, "today that I asked to have it published in the Vatican's Osservatore Romano. I urge all journalists to keep on researching and investigating what is happening around the world." So every once in a while, Francis, during interviews or addresses, he will bring up Cardinal Martini specifically, which shows where his loyalties really lie, I think, and who his mentors really are.
Yes, very, very much true. He has certainly been the great influence, as we've talked about before, on this.
As John used to call him, Francis is the Martini Pope.
Yes. Well, we're running short on time, but we will touch on our final stories. And so again, this story, as Matt mentioned, broke really the end of last week. And it is that the Biden administration has established a disinformation board. Again, they seemed happy to outsource censorship to Twitter, Facebook, etc. But now that maybe they don't have as much of a grip on Silicon Valley as they hoped with the Elon Musk movements against Twitter. Now they want to bring it in-house to the government and have the government censor, essentially. And as Matt said, this is being called around the internet the Ministry of Truth. That reference is to a really prescient novel, that was written by a former communist in England in the 1930s to show really how socialism works to establish itself. They establish everything that is its opposite. So the Ministry of Justice promotes injustice. The Ministry of Truth promotes disinformation and falsity. And their job, the main character in it, is to go and rewrite history. So if the party decides, oh, well, we don't like the way that happened. Let's go rewrite newspapers. And they literally changed the history books. And that's where the expression down the memory hole comes from, because when his job, if there's something they want to get rid of, he pulls it out and puts it down this memory hole where everybody has to told they have to forget about it. So here's a little video I saw someone. This was before this latest thing, but a little video about the slogans, because everything is slogans that they use, the Marxists, like being for the current thing, that I saw that really sums up their whole approach. And that's really what it's all about. They want you to believe the opposite. So war is really peace, freedom is really slavery. They want you to believe the opposite of what is true, and
Right.
under the guise of some pretext, right, of Ministry of Truth. So this Disinformation Board, we have no reason to believe is anything but a communist type censorship organization based primarily upon the now confirmed head that will be running this board, Nina Jankovic. I assume Jankovic is how it's pronounced. Will be running this, and she is well known for, first of all, she's worked for the Ukrainian government.
First red flag.
Yeah, first red flag. Yeah, the Ukrainian government, and is focused in studying East former communist countries. She is still very vocal, saying that the Hunter Biden laptop is Russian disinformation, which now even mainstream news outlets, CNN, have admitted it was real, and that was all fake, that it wasn't Russian disinformation, it was a real thing. And so, but she's still sticking to her story. This is what I say it is. And she's going to be the person in charge of deciding what's true and what's not. The Biden administration has said that this little board that she is heading will work under the Department of Homeland Security, another very problematic government uh, organization. And its work would basically focus on suppressing and working against disinformation that's judged to be disinformation by her and her other cohort or other people that she will get to work for her. She also worked for the Fulbright Clinton Public Policy Fellowship. She is quoted as saying she views the Hunter Biden laptop as a, quote, Trump campaign product. Again, even though 2 years later, everybody's admitting it was a
Right.
real laptop that is authentic.
And
So
interestingly, she's also Jesuit educated.
yes. Actually, I met a priest the other night I was having dinner with who said every politician that's been a problem was Jesuit educated, from Fidel Castro to Anthony Fauci. They really are the worst. But in any event, this is really dystopian. I mean, this is,
Yes.
because particularly when socialism's losing people, when it's losing, and that's what they're losing, everyone. And the only way they can survive is through force, and to force people. And this is why they want to force people. The transgender issue, I think, is so important. They want to force people to deny reality. Say that's a man. Well,
Right.
it's not. Yes, say it. And this is, what the Soviets and the communists did for years. They want you to buy into their upside down, through the looking glass version of reality, because that's how, if you concede that and surrender your freedom of thought, your attachment to reality, then they have won over you and they control you.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I'll post a link to this article that was posted at the Federalist a couple days ago, but it's called 6 Dystopian Things Biden's, quote, Disinformation Board Pick Nina Jankovic has done. And it goes through this list of 6 things, including some of which Brian has mentioned. There's also this really creepy, weird video that she posted. It's from a TikTok video where she put strange words about how to quote, combat disinformation to the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious song from Mary Poppins. And yeah, it's just very bizarre.
It's all very bizarre. Yes. And nothing good can come of it.
No. So in closing for this story, just the reaction of Elon Musk, as news broke about this last week, he simply tweeted in response to somebody, quote, "This is messed up." And we certainly agree with that.
Yes, absolutely. That really sums up this whole thing. Speaking of messed up.
Yeah. So our next story, there's a new report out from Michael Hitchborn of the Lepanto Institute. And again, I'll include a link in the video description so you can look at it more in detail. But the headline explains Catholic bishops fund pro-abortion doulas, which are women who assist with women who are pregnant and helping them prepare for childbirth and such. So Catholic bishops fund pro-abortion doulas for third consecutive year, despite 2020 warning. And he also has embedded in this article about a roughly 18-minute video report that is good. I definitely recommend watching that as well. But here's a little bit of his summary on his website, lepantoin.org. In 2020, the Lepanto Institute sent a detailed report to the Catholic bishops of the United States proving that the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, the CCHD, provided a $60,000 grant to the Ostara initiative. The report gave indisputable evidence that Ostara was directly advocating abortion, quote, as a resource to women in prison while assisting women to gain access to abortion providers. One article cited in the report indicated that the co-founder of the Ostara initiative and her project director explained how their, quote, doulas have sometimes served as resources for women considering abortion, end quote. Another article said, quote, they have recently aided a few of their clients in accessing abortion care. So another story of the bishops just dropping the ball and using money donated by the faithful to fund these immoral projects and initiatives. Mm-hmm. So we commend Michael Hitchborn for his ongoing work to expose these horrible cases of financial abuse, really. And we hope and pray that someday God will deliver us from such wolves in sheep's clothing and give us bishops after his own heart. That should be our prayer.
Yes. Again, the bishops have just shown their dereliction of duty in this regard. And this is part of the other problem with collegiality, this bureaucratization of the episcopacy, rather than the bishop being responsible for his own diocese, which is manageable. That's the idea of diocese. They're manageable areas for a person to be responsible. And when they got too big, they were divided. They were subdivided into major and minor sees, dependencies. But now the USCCB, the whole thing is you're part of this massive bureaucracy. You don't know what's going on. You don't know where things are being spent. And it's a way for to really, through bureaucratization, take away the personal responsibility of the bishop. And again, there are some good bishops. I think Bishop Strickland, a few out that are trying to reassert their care as a bishop of his diocese, but that's not the product of collegiality.
And I think the other issue in our country anyway is the entanglement, the almost inseparable union between the USCCB and the Democratic Party. That's another major problem.
Major issue. Yes. Yeah. Well, for our final story today, we have again a very positive, uplifting story, Walking for Tradition. A group of mothers walked to Rome and went to a public audience. They didn't have a private audience, but a public audience with Pope Francis, and brought letters from other women and mothers of priests, traditional priests, imploring Pope Francis to stop his attack on the traditional liturgy that their sons have dedicated their lives to. Some of them, not all, I think there were a small group, maybe 5, actually walked all the way from Paris to Rome, over 800 miles. Walked to Rome. They were joined along the way, so the group got bigger, I think, as they went along. But there was a small group that started in Paris, And again, there are many ways to respond to the current crisis in the church. Obviously, to teach the faith, to resist Peter to the face when it has to be done by appropriate ways. But another is to implore and to appeal to the graces that would be available to any pope, if he is going to allow himself to be open to it, of children of the church appealing to their mother. So they walked. They attended as I said, the public audience. The Holy Father, however, actually even acknowledged that they were there. He said, "quote I cordially greet the French-speaking pilgrims, especially the association La Voix Romane, which is the name of this group of mothers of priests, the Roman Way, who have come from France." So now I have no idea if Pope Francis knew why they were there or what their background was, but he did, at least someone put on his list of announcements to note them. The women, as I said, brought and delivered letters addressed to the Pope from faithful attached to the celebration of the Tridentine Rite. One of the mothers told in an interview with LifeSite News, her name was Elizabeth Denis, who walked the entire journey from Paris. She was with that group, about how her son has been a priest for 10 years, and her husband also walked along with her. And
Yes.
they really have said how their families, their sons, have been strengthened by their love for the traditional liturgy and lead so many souls to turn to the Lord. So a beautiful way to give public witness to the traditional liturgy of the church, particularly as mothers, right? The vocation of a mother, of a priest, is very great. And maybe our viewers know
Yes.
the beautiful story of the Mothers of Lou. There's this little village in Rome that didn't really have many vocations, and the mothers of the whole little town hamlet got together and prayed for vocations regularly on a set day every week. Beautiful prayers that they preserve for us, and an avalanche, a flood of vocations came out of this tiny little hamlet because of the prayers of these mothers. So the prayers of mothers of priests are very powerful. So we commend them
Yes.
for their public witness. I mean, to make that long journey on foot to Rome, to witness to their sons' vocations is wonderful.
Definitely. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our stories today. We thank you for joining us here on the Catholic Family News Weekly News Roundup. If you've enjoyed this show, we do ask that you give us a thumbs up, hit the like button, and
Yeah.
make sure to share the video far and wide with your family and
Yes.
friends. That's really how the main way that we get this content circulated is with your help. As Brian reminds us,
Yes.
we don't
Yes.
have the money to pay for advertising, so we count on you to be our algorithm, so to speak, to
Yes.
spread this content.
Yes.
And ultimately, if you enjoy the free content we make available on our website and YouTube, Rumble channels, etc., we do ask for your support in the form of an annual subscription to our monthly newspaper, Catholic Family News. Speaking of which, the May issue is now out, and the content in the May paper is available for preview on our website, CatholicFamilyNews.com. We also have some new online content. You want to check out Brian's interview of Father Armand de Marais of the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter about his new book. And also another part in Brian's series on the Mass is available. So make sure to check out
Yes.
that content.
Yes, and wish all of the mothers out there who are watching a very happy Mother's Day. You, in such a beautiful way, participate in the great mysteries of God's creation, right? Because
Yes.
and you also share something that the fathers cannot, more directly, the experience of the Blessed Virgin Mary by completely surrendering your fiat for another, to give your fiat to give life to another. So we really honor you and wish you the best and hope you have a joyful
Yes.
Mother's Day.
And on that note, we will invoke Our Lady, our Blessed Mother, by praying the Hail Mary together. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Eternal Father, I offer you the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, all the instruments of his holy passion, that thou may put division in the camp of thy enemies, for as thy beloved Son has said, a kingdom divided against itself shall fall. Our Lady of Fatima,
Pray for us.
Pope St. Pius V,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Well, thank you. Have a wonderful week, and we'll look forward, God willing, to see you next week.
God bless you.